A little girl asked the Alpha King why her mother's portrait hung inside his castle. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Sophie stood in the vast, marble-floored hall, her wide eyes locked on the portrait hanging above the grand fireplace. It was a painting of a woman she had never met, yet her features were so familiar. The woman in the portrait had the same eyes as Sophie, eyes that gleamed with a strange combination of strength and sadness. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded in waves down her shoulders, just like Sophie's mother. But what struck her the most was the setting. The woman in the painting was dressed in royal garb, and she stood in a grand castle. This very castle. Sophie had always known that her mother had a mysterious past, but she had never imagined that it would lead to something like this. "Why is my mother's portrait hanging here?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling slightly as she looked up at the Alpha King. His cold, unreadable gaze rested on her, and for a moment, there was silence, a silence that spoke volumes. The Alpha King, Victor, was a man of power, of untold strength, and yet the expression on his face softened when he looked at Sophie. "That, my little one," he said slowly, his deep voice echoing in the grand hall, "is a story that has been buried for many years." Sophie took a hesitant step forward, her heart racing. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what he had to say, but the mystery of the portrait pulled her closer, making it impossible to turn away. "Why?" she asked again, her small hand reaching out as if to touch the painting, as if touching it would unlock the answers she sought. Victor's expression darkened, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. He took a deep breath, then motioned for Sophie to follow him down the long hallway, away from the painting and deeper into the castle. Sophie walked behind him, her mind spinning with questions. Who was the woman in the painting? Why did she look so much like her mother? And why was she connected to the Alpha King? The questions burned in her chest, but she held them back, knowing that she would soon have the answers. The castle's corridors seemed endless, lined with tapestries and statues that whispered of a time long past. They came to a door at the end of the hallway, a door made of dark wood, intricately carved with designs Sophie couldn't make out. Victor turned to her and said, "The truth lies beyond this door, Sophie. Are you ready?" Sophie nodded, her breath catching in her throat. She was ready, more than ready, to understand the truth. The door creaked open, and the dim light inside revealed a room filled with old books and scrolls, the air thick with the scent of history. Victor gestured to a table in the center of the room, where a large, leather-bound book sat waiting. "This is where it all began," he said quietly, as he slowly opened the book. The pages were yellowed with age, and the words were written in a language Sophie didn't recognize. "Your mother was not just any woman," Victor continued, his voice low. "She was someone of great importance to this kingdom, someone whose story is intertwined with mine. But that story, it has remained hidden for far too long." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the book, knowing that it held the key to the mysteries surrounding her mother's life and her own. She took a deep breath and leaned forward, ready to hear the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Victor carefully turned the page of the ancient book, his eyes scanning the old text, the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. Sophie stood by his side, her small fingers gripping the edge of the table as she watched him intently. The air in the room felt thick, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the secrets to be revealed. "Your mother," Victor began, his voice low and measured, "was not merely a noblewoman, Sophie. She was a woman of great power, more than you could ever imagine. Her name was Isabella, and her fate was tied to mine in ways that no one outside of this castle could ever know." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. Isabella, that was her mother's name. She had always wondered about her mother's past, the gaps in her stories, the things she had never spoken of. Now, standing in this room, Sophie could feel that she was on the cusp of discovering a truth she had been unknowingly searching for her whole life. "What happened to her?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Victor's gaze shifted, as though the question had taken him back to a time long gone. She left, he said simply, though the word hung heavy in the air. But before she left, she made me a promise. A promise to protect you, Sophie. A promise to ensure that you would always have a place in this world, no matter what. Sophie was silent for a moment, trying to process his words. Her mind raced. Her mother had left her? How could that be? And yet, something about Victor's words felt truthful, like the missing piece of a puzzle finally falling into place. Why did she leave? Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor closed the book gently and stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over Sophie. He looked down at her, his expression a mixture of sadness and determination. Because of me, he said quietly. Because of the choices I made, the path I chose. Your mother. Isabella was bound by duty, Sophie. She was never meant to stay in this kingdom. Her destiny was always bigger than this castle, bigger than me. And I failed her. Sophie's eyes widened as she tried to grasp the gravity of his words. She had known that her mother's life had been full of mystery, but she had never imagined that the truth would be this complicated, this painful. What do you mean? You failed her? Sophie asked, her voice breaking slightly. Victor let out a long, heavy sigh, as though the weight of the past was too much to carry alone. I was her king, Sophie, but I was also her greatest regret. He turned away from her, walking toward the window where the moonlight spilled in, casting a silvery glow across the room. I could never be the man she needed me to be. I was too focused on power, on ruling this kingdom, to see what was right in front of me. And by the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late. Sophie took a step closer, her heart aching for both her mother and Victor. She had never known the depth of their connection, the sacrifices her mother had made, or the burden that Victor carried. Isabella never wanted to be a queen, Sophie. Victor continued, his voice tinged with regret. She wanted freedom. She wanted a life outside these walls. And when she saw that I couldn't give her that, she left. But she left you with me. She left you here, in this castle, because she knew that one day, you would need to know the truth. Sophie swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had always felt like an outsider in this castle, like there was a part of her life that didn't quite fit. But now she understood. It was all part of a much larger story, one that had been unfolding for years, long before she had even been born. So what happens now? Sophie asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Victor turned back to her, his eyes meeting hers with a sense of resolution. Now, Sophie, you must decide what to do with the truth. You are the daughter of Isabella. You have the power to shape your own future, to decide what kind of legacy you will leave behind. The choice is yours. Sophie stood there, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had always believed that her life was ordinary, that she was just a child caught in the middle of a world she didn't understand. But now, she realized that she was part of something much greater, something that stretched beyond this castle and the people who lived within it. As she looked at Victor, she felt the weight of her mother's legacy resting on her shoulders. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it, armed with the truth that had been hidden for so long. Victor's words echoed in Sophie's mind as she walked back through the grand corridors of the castle. The weight of the truth he had revealed settled in her chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. She was the daughter of Isabella, a woman who had been more than a mere figure in the kingdom's history. Sophie had never imagined that her mother's past was so deeply intertwined with the man she had just met, the Alpha King who had once been her mother's greatest love, and also her greatest sorrow. Sophie reached the balcony overlooking the vast kingdom, the moonlight casting long shadows across the stone floor. She leaned against the railing, gazing out at the night, her thoughts swirling. What did it mean for her to carry this legacy? To be the daughter of a woman who had left everything behind for freedom? The future had always seemed uncertain to Sophie, but now, it felt like an open road full of choices. But the weight of the past, of her mother's choices, loomed over her. Sophie, Victor's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find him standing at the entrance to the balcony, his figure framed by the doorway. His presence was imposing, yet there was something softer in his gaze now, something that spoke of the connection they shared. Sophie didn't speak right away. She couldn't find the words. Instead, she stepped aside, allowing Victor to join her at the railing. For a moment, They both stood in silence, watching the distant lights of the village below. I never meant for you to carry this burden, Victor said, his voice almost a whisper. But now it is yours. You have the power to shape your own path, Sophie. Your mother left you with me, not just to protect you, but to prepare you for what is to come. Sophie looked up at him, her eyes filled with questions. What do you mean, prepare me? She asked, her voice shaky. What's coming? Victor's gaze grew distant, as though he were looking at something far beyond the horizon. There are forces at work that neither of us can control. Forces that want to see this kingdom fall. Forces that want to take what your mother left behind. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? Are you saying that someone is after me? Victor turned to face her, his expression serious. It's not just you, Sophie. It's everything your mother stood for. The legacy she left behind. People want to use you, to control you. But you mustn't let them. Sophie's mind raced. She had thought that the hardest part of her life would be understanding her mother's past. But now she realized that the real challenge was only just beginning. How do I stop them? She asked, determination rising in her chest. Victor placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was both comforting and heavy with responsibility. You'll have to decide what kind of leader you want to be. It's not just about protecting yourself. It's about protecting everything your mother believed in, everything she fought for. You must find your own strength, Sophie. Sophie nodded slowly, her mind already working through the possibilities. She had always felt like she didn't belong in this castle, like she was just a child in a world full of adults with secrets. But now, she understood that her place here was not by chance. Her mother had left her for a reason, and it was time for Sophie to learn to stand on her own. I'm ready, she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. Victor's eyes softened slightly, though a flicker of concern remained. Are you sure? He asked, his voice carrying a trace of uncertainty. Sophie met his gaze, her heart steady. I have to be. With that, she turned back to the railing, her eyes fixed on the night ahead. The journey was just beginning, and Sophie knew that it would be filled with challenges and choices. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face them. The legacy of her mother, the power of her bloodline, and the weight of the past all rested on her shoulders. But Sophie wasn't afraid. She was determined to make her own path, no matter what lay ahead. The days following Sophie's conversation with Victor were filled with a mixture of contemplation and quiet preparation. The weight of her newfound responsibility pressed heavily on her, but it was also a source of quiet determination. Every corner of the castle now felt different, as though it held a piece of the puzzle she had yet to fully understand. Sophie found herself spending more time in the castle's library, poring over ancient texts and scrolls, hoping to learn more about her mother's legacy and the power that she was destined to inherit. But despite her efforts, the answers seemed just out of reach. One morning, as she sat hunched over a thick, leather-bound tome, Victor appeared in the doorway, his silhouette casting a long shadow on the floor. Sophie, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. She looked up from the book, startled, but her heart quickly settled when she saw his familiar face. What is it? She asked, setting the book aside. Victor stepped into the room, his expression serious. It's time, he said. Time for what? Sophie asked, her curiosity piqued. Victor hesitated for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully. It's time for you to learn more about your mother's legacy, to understand the full extent of the power that runs through your blood. Sophie stood up, her heart racing. But how? Where do we begin? She asked, her voice tinged with both excitement and uncertainty. Victor gave her a faint smile, though it was one that did not reach his eyes. Follow me, he said simply. They left the library and made their way down a series of winding hallways until they reached a door that Sophie had never noticed before. It was a simple wooden door, unmarked and unassuming, but there was something about it that felt different. This is where your journey truly begins, Victor said, his tone quieter now, almost reverent. Sophie looked at the door, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the handle. She turned it, and the door creaked open, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Inside, the room was filled with ancient artifacts, glowing crystals, and intricate symbols etched into the stone walls. Sophie stepped inside, her eyes wide with wonder. What is this place? She whispered. This, Victor said, stepping in after her, is the chamber of your ancestors. It is where the secrets of your bloodline have been preserved for centuries. Here, you will learn what your mother knew and what she had hoped you would one day understand. Sophie's gaze fell upon a large pedestal in the center of the room. Resting atop, it was a glowing orb, its surface swirling with light. The orb seemed to hum with power, and Sophie could feel a pull towards it, as though it was calling her. Your mother was one of the last of a line of powerful women, Sophie. Victor continued, his voice low. The women of your bloodline were born with a gift, a connection to the magic of this land. They were protectors, warriors, healers, and leaders. And now, that gift has passed to you. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she approached the orb, her fingers hovering just above its surface. She could feel the energy emanating from it, warm and comforting, yet full of a strength that she had never known she possessed. What do I do? Sophie asked, her voice barely a whisper. Touch it, Victor said softly. Let it recognize you. Sophie hesitated for only a moment before she placed her hand on the orb. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through her, and the room seemed to pulse with light. She gasped, her body trembling as visions flooded her mind. Visions of her ancestors, of powerful women who had shaped the kingdom with their strength and wisdom. She saw battles fought and won, lives saved, and kingdoms protected. She saw her mother, Isabella, standing tall and fierce, her eyes filled with determination and love. The visions were overwhelming, but they were also enlightening. Sophie saw her place in this legacy, and for the first time, she understood what it meant to be a part of this powerful bloodline. The orb glowed brighter, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, the vision stopped. Sophie stood there, breathless, her hand still resting on the orb. The chamber was silent, and the energy in the air seemed to have settled, but Sophie knew that everything had changed. She had tapped into something deeper than herself, something ancient and powerful. Victor stepped forward, his face filled with a mixture of pride and concern. You are ready, he said quietly. But this is just the beginning. There are still many challenges ahead, Sophie. Your journey will not be easy, but I believe in you. You have the strength of your mother in you, and now, you must learn to wield it. Sophie nodded slowly, her heart full of determination. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. She had discovered her true power, and now, she was ready to embrace her destiny. I had discovered something within myself. The power that my mother, Isabella, had passed down to me, something I had never imagined. The orb had shown me glimpses of my ancestors, powerful women who had shaped the land with their courage, wisdom, and strength. It had been overwhelming but enlightening, and I now understood that my path was one of leadership and responsibility. The chamber, where I stood with Victor, seemed quieter now, as if it were waiting for me to absorb the full weight of the legacy I had just tapped into. I could feel the pulse of magic still within me, the energy flowing just beneath my skin, and it was both invigorating and daunting. Victor had stepped back, giving me the space I needed to process what had just happened. You have made contact, he said, his voice steady. But this is just the beginning, Sophie. What you've learned today is only a fraction of what you must master. I nodded, my mind racing with the knowledge that had just been unlocked. What happens now? I asked. Now, you begin your training, Victor replied. You must learn to control your power, to understand it fully before you can use it to protect the kingdom and the people who rely on you. His words settled heavily on my shoulders, reminding me of the enormity of what lay ahead. But how do I train? Where do I start? I asked, feeling a surge of both excitement and apprehension. Your journey will take time, Victor said, his voice calm. There are many things you must learn. The magic of your bloodline is not something that can be mastered overnight. It requires patience, discipline, and understanding. You must learn to connect with the land, with the people who have lived here for generations, and with the very elements that make up this world. The thought of learning such powerful magic, of becoming someone who could protect and lead, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had never thought of myself as anything special before, just a girl living in the castle, disconnected from the world outside. But now, with Victor's guidance, I was beginning to understand that I was part of something much larger. Where do we begin? I asked, eager to start this new chapter. Victor looked at me with a seriousness that I hadn't seen before. We begin with the basics. You must learn to sense the magic within you, to understand the way it flows through your body. Only then can you begin to manipulate it. The connection between your bloodline and the magic of this land is strong, but it is also delicate. You must respect it, Sophie, or it will not respond to you. I took a deep breath, my resolve strengthening. I understand, I said. I'm ready. Victor led me out of the chamber and back into the castle's courtyard, where the first rays of sunlight were beginning to peek over the horizon. The air was cool, and the morning mist clung to the ground, giving the world an ethereal glow. It was here, in this quiet space, that I would begin my training. Victor stood across from me, his gaze steady and expectant. Close your eyes, he instructed. Focus on your breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Let your mind clear of distractions. I did as he instructed, feeling the cool morning air fill my lungs. As I exhaled, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Now, Sophie, Victor said softly, I want you to focus on the energy inside you, the magic that has been waiting for you to awaken it. Feel it, let it come to the surface. Don't force it, but let it rise naturally, as if it has always been there. I closed my eyes tighter, reaching within myself for something that I had only just begun to understand. At first, there was nothing, just the sound of my breath and the gentle rustling of the trees in the distance. But then, faintly, I felt it, a subtle warmth deep inside me, a soft, pulsing energy. It was like the heartbeat of the earth itself, alive and vibrant. As I focused on it, the energy grew stronger, flowing from the tips of my fingers to the soles of my feet. I could feel it, like a thread connecting me to everything around me. The land, the trees, the sky above. Good. Victor's voice cut through the stillness. You are beginning to feel it. But this is just the first step. Now, you must learn to control it. To use it, not as a force of nature, but as an extension of yourself. My heart raced with the realization that this was only the beginning of my journey, a journey that would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, I felt like I was ready to face it, ready to embrace my destiny and everything that came with it. The path ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but I no longer felt lost. I had found my purpose. And with that, the future seemed to open up before me, full of possibility and hope. The days began to blend together as Sophie threw herself into her training. Victor's lessons were demanding, but she could feel herself growing stronger with each passing day. She spent hours in the courtyard, learning to control the energy within her, learning to connect with the magic of the land, and learning to trust in herself. The power that had once felt foreign and overwhelming now flowed through her with a sense of ease. Her senses had sharpened, and she began to understand the subtle connections between the elements of nature and the magic she wielded. Yet, despite the progress she had made, Sophie could feel a lingering unease within her. The more she trained, the more she realized how much she still didn't know. The power she possessed was vast, but it was also unpredictable. It was a part of her now, but it was also something she had to learn to navigate. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Sophie found herself standing on the edge of the castle grounds, gazing out at the distant mountains. The land stretched out before her, vast and untamed, a reminder of the responsibility she now carried. It's a beautiful sight, isn't it? Victor's voice broke the silence. Sophie turned to find him approaching, his expression contemplative. It is, she replied. It's hard to believe that all of this is connected to me now. Victor nodded, his gaze following hers. It's part of who you are, Sophie. The land, the people, the magic, it all flows through your bloodline. And with that comes the weight of leadership. Sophie felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had always thought of herself as just a girl living in the castle, disconnected from the kingdom outside. But now, with her mother's legacy and the power she had inherited, she understood that she was no longer just an observer of the world. She was a part of it. I'm starting to understand, Sophie said softly, her eyes still focused on the landscape. But it's overwhelming sometimes. I feel like there's so much I still don't know. Victor's gaze softened. It's natural to feel that way, he said. You're only just beginning to understand the full scope of your abilities. But that doesn't mean you're not ready. You have the strength of your mother in you. You just need to trust it. Sophie took a deep breath, feeling a rush of determination flood through her. She had come so far in such a short time, and yet, it felt like the journey was only beginning. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I want to learn everything I can. I want to be the leader my mother wanted me to be." Victor smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "And you will be," he said. "But remember, true leadership is not just about power. It's about wisdom, compassion, and the ability to listen. You must be prepared to make difficult decisions, and sometimes, you will have to choose the path that is not the easiest, but the one that is right." Sophie nodded, absorbing his words. She understood now that the road ahead would not always be clear, and there would be moments when the weight of her responsibilities would feel unbearable. But she was ready. She had to be. "What's the next step?" she asked, her voice filled with resolve. Victor looked at her thoughtfully before answering. "The next step is learning to connect with the people, Sophie. You can have all the power in the world, but without the trust and support of the people, that power will mean nothing. You must learn to lead them, not through force, but through understanding. You must earn their loyalty, not demand it." Sophie absorbed this, her mind already racing with the possibilities. "How do I do that?" she asked. Victor smiled slightly. "The first step is understanding their needs, their fears, their hopes. Spend time with them, listen to their stories, and show them that you care. When they see that you understand them, they will follow you." Sophie's heart swelled with determination. She had never imagined that leadership would require so much more than power. It was about connection, about building relationships with the people she was destined to lead. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I'll learn. I'll earn their trust." Victor nodded approvingly. "I know you will, Sophie. But remember, you cannot do this alone. You will need allies, people who believe in you. Surround yourself with those who will support you, who will stand by you when the path gets difficult." Sophie turned her gaze back to the horizon, feeling a sense of purpose settle deep within her. She wasn't just the daughter of Isabella anymore. She was Sophie, the future leader of this kingdom, and she would do whatever it took to honor her mother's legacy and protect the land that had always been her home. Sophie's days in the castle had taken on a new rhythm. Each morning, she would rise with the sun, her body eager for the day's training, her mind filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Victor's lessons continued, each one building upon the last, guiding her to understand the intricacies of her power and the responsibilities that came with it. But as much as she focused on mastering the magic within her, the weight of her mother's legacy never left her thoughts. It was always there, a constant reminder of the path she was now walking. Despite the progress she had made, Sophie still felt a sense of unease. There were so many questions left unanswered, so many things she had yet to understand. Her power was growing, but the challenges ahead were still unclear. One afternoon, as she sat in the garden, a cool breeze tugging at her hair, Sophie found herself lost in thought. She had spent so much time focusing on her training, but she had yet to fully connect with the people she was meant to lead. Victor's words echoed in her mind. "You must understand their needs, their fears, their hopes." Sophie knew he was right. To be a true leader, she couldn't just rely on her power. She needed to understand the hearts and minds of the people who would one day look to her for guidance. But how could she do that when she had spent most of her life isolated within the castle walls? The answer came to her unexpectedly. If she wanted to understand the people, she would have to step outside the castle, to see the world through their eyes. She couldn't remain sheltered in her role as the future ruler. She needed to experience the kingdom firsthand. The decision felt like a turning point. Sophie knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it was the right thing to do. She had to learn from the people who had lived through the struggles and triumphs of the kingdom, from those who had seen the true face of leadership. That evening, after a particularly exhausting training session, Sophie approached Victor with her decision. "I need to leave the castle," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt inside. Victor looked at her, a mixture of concern and understanding in his gaze. "Are you sure, Sophie? You know the dangers that lie beyond these walls." Sophie nodded. "I know, but it's the only way I can truly learn what it means to lead. I need to see the kingdom, to talk to the people, to understand their lives and their struggles. I can't lead them if I don't know them." Victor remained silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. "Very well, but you must promise me something. If you go, you will be cautious. The world outside the castle is not as safe as you might think. There are those who would seek to use your power for their own gain. Do not trust everyone you meet. Sophie met his gaze, her resolve hardening. I promise. The next morning, Sophie set out on her journey. She wore simple clothes, nothing that would draw attention to her as the future ruler of the kingdom. She traveled in disguise, taking a path that led her through the countryside, away from the prying eyes of the castle. As she walked through the villages, Sophie was struck by the contrast between the life she had known and the world she was now seeing. The people were kind, but their lives were hard. Many were struggling, their homes small and weathered, their faces marked by exhaustion. Yet, despite the hardships, there was a resilience in their eyes, a determination to keep moving forward. Sophie spent days traveling, speaking with the villagers, hearing their stories, and gaining a new perspective on the world she had been born into. She saw the depth of their loyalty to the kingdom, but she also saw their fears. They were afraid of the future, of the instability that seemed to hang over them like a dark cloud. Some feared that the kingdom was falling apart, that the strength of the old leadership was fading. Sophie listened carefully, asking questions, learning about their hopes and dreams for a better future. And with each conversation, she grew more determined. The people had been right to worry. There was much that needed to be done, and Sophie knew that her path was not just about mastering her power. It was about healing the wounds that ran deep within the kingdom. As she continued her journey, Sophie realized that this was the first step in truly becoming the leader she was meant to be. She wasn't just the daughter of Isabella, destined to carry on a legacy. She was Sophie, a leader in her own right, someone who would fight for her people, someone who would make a difference in their lives. She knew the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. And with that, Sophie knew that the next chapter of her journey was just beginning. Sophie had been traveling for weeks, moving from village to village, learning more about the people she would one day lead. With each conversation, her understanding deepened. The hardship, the hope, the fear, and the strength of the people, it was all starting to form a clearer picture. They were resilient, but they were also uncertain, caught between a past they didn't understand and a future they couldn't predict. Sophie realized just how fragile the balance in the kingdom truly was. She had been born into a life of luxury, surrounded by protection, power, and privilege, but she had never truly known the struggles of the people. Now, everything was different. She could see their fear. They feared the growing instability, the unrest that seemed to be brewing just beneath the surface. Sophie had heard rumors of factions gathering, whispers of people who wanted to take control of the kingdom, to reshape it in their image. She knew that her mother, Isabella, had fought against such forces in the past, but the kingdom was different now. Its strength was fading, and without strong leadership, it was vulnerable. It became clear to Sophie that the path ahead would not just require power, it would demand unity. She would have to bring the people together, to heal the divisions that had begun to form. But how? The question lingered in her mind, and she didn't have the answer yet. As she approached the next village, Sophie was greeted by a group of villagers who had heard about her arrival. They were curious, but also cautious, unsure of what to make of the young woman, who claimed to be the daughter of the long-lost queen. Sophie felt the weight of her mother's legacy press upon her. She had never expected to walk in her mother's shoes, but now, she couldn't avoid it. She had to be the leader they needed. She had to find a way to gain their trust, to show them that she was more than just a name. The villagers were wary at first, but Sophie spoke with them, asking about their lives, their struggles, their hopes for the future. She listened, truly listened, to what they had to say. She shared her own story, telling them of her journey and of the lessons she had learned. Slowly, the walls began to come down. The people began to see her not as the distant figure they had heard of, but as someone who cared about them, someone who understood their pain. Over the course of the next few days, Sophie helped the village with small tasks, repairing homes, gathering food, and listening to the stories of those who had been forgotten. It was in these quiet moments, away from the politics and the power, that Sophie felt the most connected to the people. She was no longer just the future ruler, she was a part of their world. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Sophie sat by a fire with a group of villagers. They laughed, shared stories, and talked about their dreams for the future. It was in this moment that Sophie realized something profound. Leadership was not just about command or control. It was about connection. It was about being there for the people, standing with them through their darkest times, and guiding them through the uncertainty of the future. The next morning, as Sophie prepared to continue her journey, she was approached by a village elder, a woman named Alara, who had been watching her quietly from the sidelines. "You are different from the others who have come before you," Alara said, her voice gentle but firm. "You listen. You care. That is what will make you a great leader." Sophie smiled, humbled by the elder's words. "I have learned that leadership is not about power or position," she said. "It's about earning the trust of those you lead. It's about making the people feel seen, heard, and valued." Alara nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "You are on the right path, child. But remember, the road ahead will not be easy. There will be those who will test you, who will try to turn you against the people. Stay true to your heart, and you will lead them with strength and compassion." Sophie's heart swelled with gratitude. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready. Ready to lead, ready to make a difference, and ready to honor her mother's legacy by being the ruler the kingdom needed. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sophie set off for the next village, her steps steady and confident. The journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid. She knew now that she had the power to change the future. And with that knowledge, Sophie embraced the challenges ahead, knowing that with each step, she was one step closer to the leader she was destined to become. Sophie's journey had taken her deeper into the kingdom, from village to village, town to town. With each passing day, she grew more confident in her ability to connect with the people, and her understanding of what it meant to be a leader expanded. But even as her bond with the people strengthened, Sophie knew there was still much to learn. The lessons she had learned from the villagers, their struggles, and their dreams were powerful, but the political landscape of the kingdom was shifting, and Sophie had only scratched the surface. The unrest she had sensed in the hearts of the people was real. Whispers of rebellion had begun to grow louder, and Sophie knew that her ability to lead would soon be tested. One evening, as she sat by the fire, a familiar figure approached her. It was Victor. His face was serious, his eyes shadowed with concern. "Sophie," he began, his voice low, "I've been hearing troubling reports. There are factions within the kingdom who are beginning to question your legitimacy. They see you as nothing more than a child, the daughter of a queen who left without a trace." Sophie's heart sank. She had known there would be challenges, but hearing Victor's words made the reality of the situation more daunting. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. Victor looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You must show them your strength. Not the power of magic, but the strength of your heart. The strength of your resolve." Sophie nodded slowly, understanding. This was no longer just about proving her ability to wield magic. It was about showing the kingdom that she was capable of leading them through the uncertainty, through the darkness that threatened to overtake them. The next morning, Sophie gathered the villagers together, addressing them with the same determination she had found in herself over the past weeks. "The road ahead will not be easy," she began, her voice carrying across the quiet square. "But we must face it together. I am not just the daughter of Isabella. I am Sophie, and I will lead this kingdom with everything I have." The villagers listened in silence, their faces uncertain but hopeful. It was in this moment that Sophie realized the true test of leadership wasn't just about inspiring loyalty, it was about earning it. She wasn't the queen yet, not officially, but she could see the change in their eyes. They were starting to believe in her. But the challenges were far from over. Word of Sophie's speech spread quickly, and the tensions within the kingdom began to rise. Sophie knew that the factions within the court would not be easily swayed. They would test her, push her to prove that she was capable of leading. And so, with each passing day, Sophie worked harder. She spent more time listening, learning, understanding the needs of her people. She spoke with the leaders of nearby towns, gathered intelligence from her most trusted allies, and worked to bridge the gaps between the different factions. Slowly but surely, the kingdom began to stabilize. Sophie's efforts to build trust, to demonstrate her strength and resolve, began to yield results. The people started to rally behind her. The whispers of rebellion grew quieter, replaced by discussions of how Sophie could lead them through the uncertain times ahead. One evening, as she sat with Victor, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was still unclear, but for the first time, Sophie felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. "You've done it," Victor said, his voice filled with admiration. Sophie looked at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "I've done nothing yet," she said quietly. "But I will. I will do everything I can to lead this kingdom with the strength and wisdom it deserves." And in that moment, Sophie knew that she was ready to face whatever challenges the future held, ready to honor her mother's legacy, and ready to step into the role that was always meant for her. The kingdom was on the verge of a new era, and Sophie was prepared to guide them through it. With every decision, every step she took, she was becoming the leader the kingdom needed, the leader they could believe in. Sophie was ready to embrace her destiny,